Today I'm standing on top of the Great Temple Mound. So I've already been to Rose Hill, but I've stopped by Ocmulgee Mounds National Historical Park, and I think this is where I'll start the video. There's a lesser temple mound there, and then back in the distance, that parking area where that car is headed is the funeral mound. I know that the funeral mound was dug up and reset, and I'm sure many of these mounds have also been gone through. Nonetheless, what remains are the remnants of a once incredible society that lived here at the fall line. The indigenous people had access to the coastal plains and the Georgia Piedmont, and they were once a very powerful society. And I've come here to pay tribute to those that were here before us. And now we'll cross the river and head over to Rose Hill Cemetery. This morning I've come to the edge of the Georgia Piedmont. The Georgia Piedmont meets the coastal plains in Macon, Georgia, and the famous Rose Hill Cemetery, established in 1840. It is yet another garden cemetery modeled after Mount Auburn. If you've heard of this cemetery, you've probably heard of it through the Allman Brothers. They're buried here, and we will go visit that grave site. I pulled out of my driveway this morning and started listening to them. And because we live in such a litigious society, I can't play any other songs through this video, but I can sing a cappella. So let's go check it out. Now this is a cool thing here. Every time I come into cemeteries, no matter how many times I've been, I'll always see a couple things I've never seen before, and this is one of them. This is a white bronze monument here. I always like to go up to these monuments and knock on them. They're metal. And then right next to it are these cast iron graves. Oftentimes these will get damaged and pieces will be missing. It looks like the top's missing on some of these. The little crest thing right there. These are really cool. One thing I always notice about this cemetery is the roadways are super narrow. And so you can drive through it, but it's best to walk it. This is a really pretty monument right here. The sun's not even up yet, but we'll get better light as I go through the video. I find this to be a very beautiful monument. Way down here at this roundabout, there's a lot of beautiful monuments down here. I've always been drawn to this section of the cemetery. And this monument here is for Joseph Bond. He was one of the most successful cotton growers in Georgia in the 1800s. He was killed by an overseer that he fired for mistreating an enslaved person. We got the sun just starting to rise over there. One of my favorite sections of this cemetery. I mainly love the staircase, and we'll go down to the front of the mausoleums and how it enters into sort of the Ocmulgee River down there. And I'd always loved coming here. I knew the Allman Brothers were buried here, but some guy took me around on a tour in Macon one time and showed me where two of the band members died from a motorcycle wreck. I always just loved the front of these mausoleums here. But this one specifically was on the back of their first album cover. The band stood in front of this mausoleum and took a photo. You can even see someone set a rose there. It's a real rose too. And how the ground's a little trodden. So you've got the Ocmulgee River here and the railroad tracks. I've just loved this staircase and these really imposing monuments. But another one of my favorite things is you can go down this little trail here, and I'll sing us another a cappella tune as well. You got a real pretty creek, but specifically these crypts up here are what's always been a real draw for me. I've always loved this one specifically. I imagine at one time it was all painted white. That was probably a really pretty thing to see. It's pretty now. I just love how these crypts are sort of built into the hill. It's kind of hard to get to this spot too. I love this pyramid monument right here as well. Here's another win for the sunrise. It's beautiful relief here with the sun just starting to crest above the horizon. Here's a beautiful example of a crib grave. Narcissa Powers. What a name. A relief of an angel coming to get you when you're dead. It's cold this morning, I can see my breath, but just a beautiful, beautiful, beautiful place to be. Down here by the railroad tracks is another site, if you're an Allman Brothers fan, that you'll have to come see. This is the grave of Elizabeth Reed. Notice the rows. A lot of people that visit this cemetery for all the Allman Brothers history, but there's a whole 100 years or more of history before they started coming, so there's lots to see here. The native Maconite that took me around Macon mentioned how the Allman Brothers used to jam back here in this nook. Back there in that nook is where the Allman Brothers are buried, and to the left is the Confederate dead section. This whole cemetery is a series of hills and valleys, and each little valley has something special in it, and this one has the Allman Brothers. Here's the Allman Brothers plot. You got Butch Trucks, Greg Allman, Dwayne Allman, and Barry Oakley. Dwayne and Barry were both killed in a motorcycle accident, separately, but 3 blocks from one another in downtown Macon. The guy that took me around Macon showed me where these two got in their wrecks. If you're a big Allman Brothers fan, I recommend coming to this cemetery and giving these guys a visit. These guys are a little bit before my time, but I too have used that sacred visionary plant medicine, and it is what showed me my spirituality. And you'll notice the roses that are set through the gate here. When I first started coming here, Butch and Greg Allman hadn't died yet, and it was just Dwayne and Barry. And all this fencing that we see was much smaller, and then they've since expanded it to make room for more. It's just a beautiful spot to be this morning as that sun starts to rise. This view here is one of the reasons why I consider Rose Hill to be one of the top 5 cemeteries in Georgia. It's incredible. I've always really loved this stone here. It's the grave of an 8-year-old boy. The epitaph reads, "Was a brave little fireman, attached to Defiance Fire Company number 5. The powerful sun has risen. And here we have a Masonic grave site. It's got a stone pillow and the book. Always thought this was a really cool carving in the front of it here. This is a really impressive cast iron fence here on this plot. And within this plot is this beautiful statue of this angel. I really love the wings on it. I tried. Right by the entryway is a beautiful arch right here, and this is for the Masonic Lodge. I'm assuming this to be one of the more original Masonic burial plots, as opposed to the previous plot that we saw. When you walk into it, it's got a lot of simple headstones, but there are a few larger ones in this plot. Here's another larger stone in that Masonic plot. This man was 30 years old when he died in 1843. Here's another good example of a crib grave. And then right behind it, Little Robbie. There's a lot of really beautiful reliefs here throughout this cemetery. And then right here at Little Robbie, you get a nice view of just how big this cemetery is. Under this beautiful magnolia tree right here is another relief. There are no shortage of beautiful monuments here in this cemetery. This is another one. This angel is on the grave of Robert Smith, who died in the Civil War. And behind him is one of the more impressive cedar trees that I've seen. It is huge. We'll go walk up to it. Small little stone obelisk here in this plot. And just look at the size of this. It's a big old sumbitch. It's the kind of tree you want to give a hug to. Get in here. These are some very ornate monuments here. Some of the dates on these monuments are from the 1840s and the 1850s. And this stone here that reads died on the field of honor. He died in 1862, I'm assuming, probably in the Civil War. You can stand on some of the crests of these hills here and you just get a beautiful view of the cemetery. Shout out the sun. Here's the grave of Dr. Holt, died in 1843. And then here's a word you don't see these days, but the consort of Dr. Holt died in 1849. Macon sits right at the fall line, which is where the coastal plains meet the Piedmont. Below the fall line, all the rivers are navigable by boat, whereas above the fall line, you're met with rapids, and you have to do a lot of portages to get around those rapids. And so Macon was about as far up as you could get before travel got difficult. And so, while I'm speculating, or I don't want to sound like too much of a historian, it's one of the reasons you'll see a lot of these ornate monuments here, because they could get up here by boat very easily. I love this view here with how the sun is casting through the tree and the light. That's why you leave your house at dark to get here. This is the grave of Miss Parthenia Raines. Has a beautiful statue on top. Here's a beautiful magnolia tree. And you can tell this one's an old one by the bark, I think. I don't know. Some of the monuments on this plot are dated from the 1850s. So maybe this tree was planted around the time these guys were buried. And if so, this tree is over 150 years old. In a lot of these old cemeteries, stuff starts to move and settle, and there's not always a lot of money to keep up with the cemeteries. It's not to say this was a cheap job, in as much as this is the type of stuff that you gotta do to keep up with the cemetery. We've got these chunks of wood here holding up this plot. I like these little baby obelisks right here on this plot. This is a more contemporary plot here, mid-late 1900s into the 2000s. Just these little tiny obelisks. I just wiped my lens off, so God forbid there's smudges on all the videos before this. Holy shit. Nonetheless, pretty place, beautiful cemetery. Be happy, we're here. Here's another white bronze monument here, and this one was damaged. I'm assuming it's fallen and was set back up, but not without damage to the top. Here's another beautiful crib grave here for Lula Billups. She was born in Athens, shares my dad's birthday, September 29th, and also died on her birthday, her 30th birthday, on September 29th, 1879. The inscription even reads, died in Macon on her birthday, September 29th, 1879. Like many of the other cemeteries I've been to, there's a lot of beautiful pathways you can walk here between the family plots. This is the burial of Charles Bullock and Nicholas Waters Wells, both of whom died in 1829, which was before this cemetery was founded. So more than likely they were buried elsewhere and moved here when the cemetery opened, or not long after. This here's the grave of Alfred Holt Colquitt. He was born in Walton County. He was the governor of Georgia and a U.S. congressman, was also involved in the Mexican War as well as the Civil War. This beautiful statue of this young child here has a stump next to them. If you see a stump in a cemetery on a grave, Oftentimes it represents a life cut short. This angel statue has a harp. This guy's name was Reason. And the epitaph is, "I'm not afraid to die." And surrounding this plot here is a very rusted cast iron fencing. I don't know what they used to finish it, but now it looks like this. It's the grave of Reverend George Hancock, and on top of his grave is an open book, and that more than likely represents the Bible. And his epitaph reads, "I will soon be drinking of the pure streams and be at rest." This is another monument that was made famous by the Allman Brothers. This is Little Martha, or Miss Martha Ellis. This is another beautiful statue here. It's for Bertha. Bertha! Alongside Rose Hill Cemetery is Oak Ridge Cemetery, which was the African American cemetery. Many of the graves are now unmarked. While it may look like an empty field, it's more than likely covered in burials. Here's some more metal monuments here. I assume at one time they used to have an obelisk or some sort of continuance above them. But you can see they're well rusted, and it's a different kind of metal than those white bronze maybe. It's a shame the interstate runs right next to this, otherwise it'd be very peaceful and quiet. This monument here is for Freeman Polehill. The inscription reads, "His friends, the traveling salesmen, have caused this monument to be erected." Here's a cool grave here. This is Peter James Bracken. He was the engineer of the locomotive Texas during the Great Locomotive Chase on the Western and Atlantic Railroad, April 12, 1862. Shout out Uncle Solon. Here's something really unique that I found here. There's a staircase here. And these stones, I am assuming, used to be markers for graves. I would be very surprised if they were originally laid like this. Pretty sad. Anyway. Who's got the one more silver dollar line? I've come back to my favorite little spot here in the cemetery. And I take it the Allman Brothers liked it over here too, since they used the front of Mr. Joseph Bond's mausoleum on the back of their first album. It's a really pretty spot in the cemetery. It's also kind of secluded too over here. If you're ever driving down I-75 through the middle of Georgia, I recommend stopping by here at Rose Hill. It's a real pretty place to come to. There's a lot of history here. Most importantly, you got to listen to a little bit of Allman Brothers while you're here. Or sing it. I'm gonna go back through the creek area one more time. It's just one of my favorite little spots. Scoop it up by the barrel. Dip it down 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 by the barrel. Dip it down, down. Dip it down, down. Bam, 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 down, 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 down. Sometimes you'll see these broken columns, and much like a tree stump, it may represent a life cut short. This woman died at the age of 26. And I know I filmed this earlier in the video, but I've come to film it again. It's just one of my favorite little spots here in the cemetery. I like to sit here and imagine what this may have looked like in 1857. Brand new. Maybe they painted it white back then. Maybe it was painted white years later. I imagine they probably had some sort of plant life growing in here. It's a real pretty area. Yes, I only know 2 songs. Here's another pretty statue here, missing both arms, and there used to be wings on the back as well. This is something I haven't seen before. It's a large obelisk, and it's got a 4-footed base. This man's name was Basil, and right next to Mr. Basil is a little more symbolism in this grave here. And that right there more than likely is a pile of rocks, which represents a life built on solid foundation. Here's a good example of how narrow these pathways can be. And you can drive through here, but I recommend parking at the front and walking. It's not that big of a cemetery, and you can see a lot more when you walk. This is the valley, or the nook, where the Allman Brothers are buried. This is the Hebrew burial grounds. On the gate it reads 1844. And like I've mentioned in previous videos, it's a tradition in Jewish cemeteries to come and leave a little stone. I'm figuring, just given the age of this section, you don't really see that. I really enjoy this epitaph this morning. Go where thy heart has gone before, and thy heart's treasure lay. Go and with opened eye explore heaven's uncreated day. Present moment, people. Okay, now I think I'm done. Anyway.